Would you like to expand on that sentence and explain how you felt when you made your complaint to the HCCC?
Yeah, well, first of all, the whole process was like a very lonely process. Unlike the process, the only other process I compare it to was the police process, and they were accommodating, helpful, clear, transparent with everything that was going on, and whereas the HCCC was very cold, I felt on the outer, and in the end I felt that I picked the wrong team by going with the HCCC.
Thank you. And then at paragraph 86 of your statement, you refer to the time when the HCCC decided to terminate your complaint in 2001. And you also say that you felt deeply disappointed and that it was an annoying decision. Would you like to elaborate on how you felt when the HCCC decided to terminate your complaint?
Well, from the time the abuse happened, then it's in your head, then it comes out. It's a big deal, and it's a big deal to me. So I found that because I didn't feel that they'd investigated it properly, also when they terminated it, they didn't give me a good enough reason for me to be relaxed about them terminating it. So for me, I was very agitated, I was angry, I was disappointed, and I just felt that I'd just been dropped. And I just didn't feel that my complaint had been answered. And even though they may not have wanted to carry on with it, I still felt that I needed more reason why it had been dropped and more explanation. So that it was disappointing.
How do you think, or what do you think the Royal North Shore Hospital could have done to have protected you from the sexual abuse of Dr. Rolleston?
Well, for a start, I think that normally if you go to emergency, I've been to emergency before that and after that, and the common thing is you go into an area where there's beds and curtains, and most of the time the curtains are open and everyone's around. So I thought, a way of minimising would be, well, don't put young children in a locked room. There should be no locked rooms or no door on the room, and be in an open space and also be with an adult if you're under 18 years of age. I mean, that would just make sense to me.
And finally, last night you read an article on the ABC website about what happened in the hearing yesterday at the Commission. And that article refers to a statement made by Professor Walton, who was the Healthcare Complaints Commissioner from 1993 until 2000. Is that correct?
Yes.
That is, that you read the article?
Yes.
And in that article, Professor Walton says, quote, "When I was the Director of the Complaints Unit and the Healthcare Complaints Commissioner, there was no evidence of wanting to conceal complaints or not investigate complaints that should be investigated. Indeed, it was the opposite." Close quotes. How did you feel when you read that statement?
Well, I read a few articles last night, and that was one of them. And it really annoyed me, and it was exactly like it brought up that whole thing that I found difficult about the HCCC. Like, what she's saying there, she was in charge of the people that I was dealing with, and my complaint didn't get investigated. So me reading that is just very contradictory to what actually happened for me, and she was in charge, and I felt that, how can she be saying that if my complaint just didn't even get a look in my books? So it annoyed me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. AWC. Thank you for telling us your story.
Okay.
We're now formally excused.
Thank you.
Now, Your Honour, the next witness will be a police witness, That was the last of the survivor witnesses. Now, the Royal Commission has been provided with two statements from two different New South Wales police people, one by Detective Aaron Ferguson and the second by Detective Sergeant Grant Slade. Now, Detective Ferguson provided an initial statement, and that one is that statement is dated the 4th of May 2015, and I propose to tender that statement, Your Honour. There's been no objection to the tendering of that.
So he's not to be called?
And I do not intend to call him.
Detective Ferguson's statement of the 4th of May will be Exhibit 27/9.
Now, Your Honour, one of the parties sought a supplementary statement from Detective Ferguson, and that was obtained, and that's been circulated to the parties for consent to tendering that also, and there has been an objection to the tendering of the supplementary.
What's the date of the supplementary?
The 6th of May, Your Honour.
6th of May, and who has the objection to it?
Your Honour, I do. My name is Hall, on behalf of Mr Rolleston. The objection is to the relevance of the document to these proceedings.
Well, look, I better have a look at it first of all, hadn't I?
Your Honour, I'm instructed it's at 13B of your statement folder.
I'm getting there. Do you object to the whole of it?
Your Honour, to particular portions of the statement. Would it be of assistance if I outlined those now?
Sorry?
Would it be of assistance if I outlined those particular?
Well, I just looked at it briefly. It in general terms, is plainly relevant to the Commission's consideration of the institutional response to the issue.
Certainly, there's no objection taken to those portions that deal with the institution's response and the ability to respond. The objection is specifically to paragraphs 4A through to B.
4A. Well, they're merely questions, aren't they?
They are. And
so they don't do anything. What's the...
Paragraph 5...
They're the answers, aren't they?
Answer to the question, and paragraphs 8 through to 9.
Well, 8 and 9.
Yes.
Well, I don't have any doubt that they're all issues that the Commission should look at once they're raised. They go to the way in which the police have responded in this particular case.
Well, Your Honour, they're matters that purport to go to allegations that are not before the Commission in terms of complainants being here. There's no dispute that there are matters that have been proven either by way of trial or that Mr Rolleston pleaded guilty to, and those are matters that he's been sentenced for. No challenge is taken to those allegations. These are matters that Mr Rolleston has not been made aware of, that he has not faced in any capacity. These are allegations that were not the subject of charges, as I understand it, and in my respectful submission, absent those complainants being before the Commission, the Commission is well placed, given the complainants that have been heard from today and yesterday, to be in a position to assess the institutional responses, both the HCCC and other associated institutions, the Royal North Shore Hospital, into the particular complaints that were made and in relation to the particular doctor concerned.
We're not going to determine whether or not these allegations were good, but we are interested to know what the processes, including the processes of the police, were in relation to the investigation and ultimate response to allegations. That's the relevance of them.
Well, Your Honour, in my respectful submission, these the fact of whether there were other allegations doesn't assist the Commission any further, given the information the Commission has already heard in relation to the response of the police and the investigations by the police.
But you may say that they may not assist us very much, but that doesn't make them irrelevant. It's part of the story. It's part of the whole story of your clients offending and the response of the various institutions, including the police, to allegations of that offending.
Well, therein lies the difficulty in my respectful submission, Your Honour, in the sense of saying that it is the story of Mr Rolleston's offending. These are matters that are allegations that have never been put to Mr Rolleston. He's never had the opportunity to answer those allegations, and they've never formed the subject of charges, as far as I'm aware, and they were not the matters that were before the court. There's no explanation, as I read the statement, of why those matters didn't proceed or weren't the subject of charges, and perhaps that would be the
Well, you could ask Detective Ferguson about those matters if you wanted to.
As I understand it, he's not to be called.
Well, he'll be called if you want him called. It's a matter for you.
Your Honour, that's as high as I can put my submissions in relation to that.
Both your client himself, if he wished to, could give evidence, certainly if he wanted to respond. And if you want Detective Ferguson called, then arrangements will be made for him to be called.
That's a matter I'll have to take some
Well,
instructions
you will, to underline the assurance that I give you that nothing will be done which could be perceived to be unfair or deny your client procedural fairness in the processes of the Commission. That much is plain.
Well, perhaps, Your Honour, in circumstances where the statement was only served on me today, moments before the Commission recommenced this morning, it might be a matter that could be held in abeyance while I have the opportunity to take some instructions and ascertain Mr Rolleston's position in relation to that.
You mean whether he wants to give evidence or...
whether the officer ought to be called to be cross-examined on the statement.
Well, we can certainly give you time to tell us that. We'll be here for a few more days. All right? But otherwise, is there any other objection that anyone has to this statement?
No, Your Honour.
It'll become Exhibit 2710. Yes.
I call Detective Sergeant Grant Slade.
Detective Sergeant, will you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
An affirmation, thank you.
Yes, would you repeat after me? I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Yes, take a seat, please.
Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Bennett.
Thank you. Can you please tell the Commission your full name?
Yes, my name is Grant Slade, spelled S-L-A-D-E.
And you've prepared a statement to assist the Royal Commission dated the 1st of May 2015.
That's correct.
And is that statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
Yes.
I tender that statement, Your Honour.
It will be Exhibit 2711.
Detective, what's your current position with the New South Wales Police?
Yes, I'm a detective sergeant with the police. and I'm currently the team leader of what's known as the Royal Commission Referral Team, attached to the Sex Crime Squad.
Right. And what's your background before coming to that position?
Prior to that, I was 9 years as a detective sergeant or a team leader with the Child Abuse Squad, and prior to that, I was actually an investigator with the Sex Crime Squad.
Thank you. In your statement, Detective, you've set out the framework from the New South Wales Police's sort of general response to victims of crime. Can you tell the Commission something about the general framework within which the New South Wales Police work?
Yes, well, the police respond to victims in numerous ways, but the goal of the police is to respond with empathy and to listen to victims, to take statements from them and to provide them with avenues where they can gain support, services, any counselling they may need.
Okay. You've mentioned a Charter of Rights.
Yes,
can you tell the Commission something about that?
The Charter of Rights is available to all police to as a guideline as well, and for victims as well. And it's the responsibility and roles of police when dealing with victims, and it also provides victims with information as to what to expect when dealing with police as well.
Mm-hmm. And do all police have regard to that charter?
Yes, they do.
Mm-hmm. Now, in addition to that sort of more broad framework, you've set out the more specific victim services within the police and that the police work with other agencies.
Yes.
Can you tell the Commission about these other agencies?
They can be Family and Community Services, New South Wales Health. There are a few that we actually deal with.
Mm-hmm. And what about the victim services? That's through the Department of Justice.
Yes, well, the victim services, one of the avenues that we can steer victims towards is the Victims Assistance Line, which then is almost a portal that can steer victims into appropriate services that they may require. And a lot of those services, victim services, come under the banner of the Justice Department.
Right. And what sort of people, do you know anything about the training or the background of the people that run the victim services?
No, I don't.
Mm-hmm. You also, in your statement, talk about other avenues or options that are offered to victims as they approach the New South Wales Police. For example, you've set out offers of assisting finding counselling.
Yes.
And what sort of counselling units are they referred to?
One, for example, is the Victim Assistance Line. Others, we could deal directly with the Rape Crisis Call Centre. Mm-hmm. And once again, New South Wales Health as well, right, for local services.
And will the police actually do this for the complainant or the victim?
Not necessarily, but if required, or if deemed required by the officer, or if requested to by the victim, yes, most definitely.
Now, in your statement, you also talk about a relationship, or in terms of receiving referrals from both the Healthcare Complaints Commission and the Medical Council. Can you tell me what you know about the current relationship in terms of information exchange between those organisations?
Are you speaking in regards to the Memorandum of Understanding between organisations?
That's correct, yes.
My understanding of that is that there's open communication between the two organisations, or sharing of information, and then it's to do with the confidentiality of that information, mm-hmm. And how both agencies should share that information. Yes, mm-hmm. that's my understanding of that.
Right. Now, there'll be, if there's a situation with for example, the Healthcare Complaints Commission, and they have a complainant where they've recommended to the complainant that perhaps they ought to approach the New South Wales Police, but the complainant themselves are reluctant to do that. Now, this is information that the Healthcare Complaints Commission has from a complainant about a potential perpetrator that's potentially committed a crime. Is there a way for the Healthcare Complaints Commission to share that information with the New South Wales Police?
I'm not aware of any policy that they have, the HCCC have, where they should make direct contact with the New South Wales Police. If we're talking in regards to issues of child sexual assault,
Yes.
and the HCCC has concerns that particular person of interest could still be having contact with children, that is a possibility. They can make a report through to the Community Services Helpline.
And so that information coming from the HCCC as opposed to the complainant itself is still useful to the police?
I believe so, yes.
Once the police receive a complaint about child sexual abuse, what are the usual avenues that the investigation takes?
Well, there's different avenues to take. Are we talking about an historical matter? Or?
Yes, it is historical.
So we're dealing with an adult victim, or
Yes.
now a person that is now an adult. So if that report's made to the police, we'd want to sit down and obtain a statement from that particular victim.
Mm-hmm. And what would happen is in a situation where the complainant felt unable to provide a statement?
However, we're still happy to communicate with police? Or?
Yeah, but we're still happy to communicate with police, let the police know the name of the alleged perpetrator, yes, and yet stop short of actually making a complaint.
So if that was the case, we would at least create what we call an intelligence report on that particular person, mm-hmm, yes, on the particular offender. Yes.
Right. You've also set out in your statement a couple of options by which the police do collect information, and one of the forms of information is a sexual assault reporting option. Can you explain what that is?
Yes, that's an option geared towards victims that may still not have decided whether they wish to make contact directly with police. It is basically a document, a multi-page document that can be found online. I believe victims are steered towards that by victim support services, and there are other internet sites that can be found upon as well through the New South Wales Police, and it is a form document that can be filled out either online or manually, either way, and it gets referred then through to the sex crime squad. And a victim on that particular form can nominate as to whether they wish to have further contact with police, or it's merely a reporting mechanism about their incident or what has occurred to them, but they don't wish further police contact. Okay.
So in that sort of situation, would you have the name of the offender or alleged offender recorded without an actual name of a complainant?
Yes, that can be.
Okay.
That can be a case, yes.
Mm-hmm. You've also said that New South Wales police officers have got mandatory reporting obligations under Section 27 of the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act.
Yes.
Now, you've referred to the fact that the police officers have their obligations under that Act. Do the police consider that mandatory reporting is still required when you've got an adult complainant complaining about sexual abuse when they were a child?
I think it's a consideration that, yes, it's something police should consider, particularly if they have that reasonable belief again where the accused person could still be in contact with children.
Right.
So that should be something I believe that's something they should consider and make that report through to the helpline.
Right, thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have any questions?
I just have a couple, Your Honour, if I may.
Anyone else?
No, Your Honour.
Detective Sergeant, at paragraph 11 and 12 of your statement, you refer to victims' services and support and then the victim access line. The question that I want to ask you now I want you to turn to your significant experience and exposure to victims of sexual crime across your professional work. You gave evidence earlier that police would, I think, steer complainants who were in need of further support or knowing more about the system apart from the police to either or both of those services. Is that right?
Yes.
Could you just assume for the purposes of my question that a complainant at this stage was an adult survivor of alleged child sexual abuse, that he or she had found themselves in a position where they were able to make a complaint to an organisation like the Healthcare Complaints Commission, were undecided about whether they were in fact ready to formally move forward with a police complaint? Would Commission personnel steering a person of that category towards either of the services that you've described at paragraph 11 or 12 of your statement be an appropriate course in your experience?
Yes, I think that would be an appropriate course. If it was felt that that person did require counselling services or support services, I think anyone in that position, particularly the HCCC, like the HCCC, yes, they should be able to at least offer that avenue for that person.
And would that be the case as well if a need to navigate the system or have counselling support services might make that person ultimately feel more comfortable to be a direct complainant to the police?
That can be part of the outcome of receiving counselling and support, yes.
Thank you. They're the only questions, Your Honour. Thank you.
Can I just understand, obviously the police deal with many victims, not just sexual assault, where the impact of the alleged crime may have had real and sometimes devastating health consequences for the victim.
Yes.
Now, is there some general approach to the care of those people which the police take?
So, when we deal with victims, as you said, of all sorts of crime, and people, of course, react in different ways to crime committed against them. But so I think police generally, when we speak to victims of crime, we hand over what's called a victim card, and on that card, this is the procedures now. And on that card is information in regards to the police officer's name that they're dealing with, the report number, contact details, and so on. On the reverse side of that card, or on the other side of the card, is contact details for victim support services, or that portal, that victim assistance line that can steer them that way. That might be all that's required for some people. But yes, when we deal with victims of a much more personalised crime, I suppose they're affected very heavily by it, police may take that step, and I certainly would expect for police to take that step where they would initiate contact for counselling service directly. They would do that themselves. They would speak probably directly with the victim about services that are available to them and steer them, I suppose, when I say accompany them, provide them much more assistance in steering them towards the appropriate services.
Try and ensure that they actually do make the contact with the service.
I would expect that, yes, and that is certainly something I would do.
And is the general position in relation to people who are so affected different to what the police would do for sexual assault victims, or is it the same?
I think for people that are heavily affected, you may make that suggestion and play a much more guided role with that person in getting them to those appropriate services. So they would all be offered the minimum standard, I suppose, but you would go that extra length with that type of victim, yes. And
when discussing these approaches, are we talking about something that's written into a protocol or a procedure manual for all victims of crime?
Yes, there's a guideline appropriate on our police intranet. Yeah. That's there for all police to refer to. I think I've referred it to in my statement. Yeah. It's one of the annexures. And it's a guideline for minimum services to victims of crime. And then there are also references to websites available to police and also to the general public that then go into specify about, I suppose, a more advanced response to victims of more serious crimes such as sexual assault, child sexual assault, and so on.
Yes. Yes. Does anyone have any questions from those matters?
No, thank you.
If I might, Detective Sergeant, I represent AWH, surviving proceedings. The response that you detail occurs initially and continues throughout the finalisation or towards finalisation of the criminal prosecution.
Response as in victim care? And
yes.
Yes, I would say yes, and I would expect that, yes, for that to occur.
In coordination with the police and perhaps through to the Director of Public Prosecution if it were to proceed?
Yes, when an investigation is commenced and referrals are made and so on as part of that process to support services, there is constant contact with victims throughout investigations. It's really up to the officer in charge as to how regular that is. It should be ongoing and continual. That is part of the victim's charter of rights, to maintain that contact and to keep the victim updated as to where it's practical to do so without giving away too much as to the investigative process and elements of that investigation. Up to the prosecution phase, police have a role to play there as well when we start getting into the court process. And then there's also witness assistance people at the court process, and the OD, the Department of Public Prosecutions, assist in that process too. So, yes, there are avenues for that support to exist throughout the entire process.
The aim is to have the support remain constant through the process.
That is the aim, yes.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you, Detective Sergeant. You're excused.
Thank you.
I call Dr. Roger Stone.
Doctor, would you take an oath on the Bible or an affirmation?
I'll take an oath.
Oath. Would you take the Bible in your hand, please? And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Take a seat, please. Yes.
Can you please tell the Royal Commission your full name?
Roger Drayton Stone.
And you've prepared a statement to assist the Royal Commission in these proceedings dated the 21st of April 2015.
I have.
And that statement is true and correct to the best of your knowledge?
It is.
Right. Now, Doctor, what are your professional
Will become Exhibit 2712. Yes.
Thank you. What are your professional qualifications, Doctor?
I graduated in medicine from the University of New South Wales in 1972 with an MBBS, Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery.
And what type of background in terms of general practice do you have?
Well, following graduation, I was a junior resident at Sutherland Hospital, and I was then subsequently in the RAAF. And from the RAAF, I went to the St Ives medical practice.
Right. And was that the first time you'd met Dr. Rolliston?
Correct.
Right. And at what point did you become a partner of that practice?
Well, once I started working at the practice, there's a 6 months period where you work there and everybody susses everyone out. And then at the end of that time, I purchased a 1/3 share of the practice and a 1/3 share of the building in which the practice was taking place.
Around about what year was that?
That was 1976.
Right. And you said in your statement that you worked there until retiring full time. Are you working at all now?
The last work I did was in December.
Okay, so you're completely retired now?
Well, not really. The place where I was last working sometimes requires somebody to fill in when one of their regular doctors is away. And I'm still available to do that if I don't have any other activities on.
Okay. Can you tell the Commission something about your working relationship with Dr. Rolliston?
Well, Dr. Rolliston was a very charismatic sort of person, and my relationship with him was initially very good, but over time things did become a bit strained for a variety of reasons, and one of the more significant reasons was financial. I became, he ran the practice books. I knew nothing about running practice books, but I became uneasy about certain aspects of that, and I did a bit of investigating of my own, correlating checks, bank statements, that sort of thing, and discovered that there were some irregularities. I later became a little suspicious that there may have been some Medicare-related irregularities, and not Medicare fraud, but checks from Medicare that should have gone into the general practice that maybe were being funneled elsewhere. And I could only establish that if I got information from Medicare, and they wouldn't provide me with the information, so I didn't pursue it any further.
Right, and you made no report of this at the time to anybody?
Only to Dr. Pollitt.
Right, and was that really the context of Dr. Rolliston leaving the practice?
Well, Dr. Rolliston never clearly stated why he was leaving the practice, but there was a certain tension between himself and myself, and I felt that it wasn't going to be a long-term good working relationship, and I was not planning to leave.
Okay. Now, you recall AWB?
I do.
And his parents?
I do.
And the family were long-standing patients of the practice?
Yes, I'm not entirely sure how long they were attending the practice before I joined, but certainly they continued for a long time afterwards.
Now, do you recall independently AWB coming to see you in April 2004?
I certainly do.
And would you like to set out what it is that your recollection of what happened occurred?
Well, the first recollection I have is his opening comments, which were, this actually has nothing to do with you, which stick in my memory because it's a very unusual opening comment from a patient. And I remember that he began to outline, or said he had something to discuss with me, and then began to outline what had happened to him from Dr. Rolliston, much to my horror, I must say. According to my notes, the consultation continued for 47 minutes, most of which I have no recollection of the detail, and the only recollection I have had and have carried with me over the years was that I felt he probably ought to report it to the police, but during the consultation I was aware that he had a lot of uncertainty about what he should do. In fact, he voiced that he hadn't thought it through, that he was unsure what he should do. And because he was an adult talking to me about what had happened to himself, I felt, and his uncertainty, I felt that if there was to be a report to the police, it should be his prerogative to do that.
And you say you made some notes at the time, but you didn't make any record in the notes of your thoughts about the police.
No, when you're having a consultation like this, I often think that to have your head buried in your notes, scribbling while the guy's telling you such a terrible story, is a bit inappropriate. So I didn't write any notes in his medical file. Two reasons for that. One is I didn't want to have my head down while he was talking to me. And the other is, you know, there's long been a question about who owns the files, what's going to happen to them, who can see them, and something like that I felt I didn't want to be generally known. And so what I did was, as soon as the patient left, I made some notes just on the practice letterhead, handwritten notes noting the date and the time, because it was clearly an important matter. And the only thing I regret is that the notes I made weren't fuller than they just outlined very basically what the problem was. And I thought it was so significant I'd remember the rest, but regrettably I don't remember it all.
Okay. Now, do you recall that AWB came back to see you in November 2005?
I actually don't recall that.
Is that right? And you've read what AWB said about his recollection of that interview?
Yes, I have read that, and I am aware that certainly how the consultation finished, his recollection and my recollection are different. I'm aware of that.
Mm-hmm. But your recollection today of, you don't have any independent recollection of November 2005?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I may say I do accept that that probably took place,
Yes.
but I don't remember it.
Yes. So you've accepted what AWB said about it?
Yes.
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 Right. Now, at the end of your statement, Doctor, you've given an example of reporting possible abuse of a child to docs.
That's right.
Right. And what's your understanding currently of a doctor's mandatory reporting obligations?
Well, my understanding is that certainly if there is evidence of current abuse of a child who is currently a child, then there is a requirement for that to be reported. Mm-hmm. I remain unclear what the situation is should an adult report about himself.
Yes, I mean, you think it's unclear. What if an adult comes to you, makes a report of child sexual abuse when they were a child, but you are aware that that perpetrator currently is still seeing other children?
Yes, that's a difficult situation, particularly in this particular instance where it was clear to me that for a variety of reasons, AWB was uncertain whether he wanted to pursue the matter through channels. He had concerns about the impact on his family, particularly about his mother. And so, whilst he was in a dilemma, then there's also a slight, slight dilemma for me in that were I to unilaterally contact the police in the context of the consultation, that could be seen as a bit of a betrayal.
Mm-hmm. You've also in your statement set out under the heading some general comments, and you looked back at what happened with AWB and suggested you might have done things differently?
Well, I suppose I've thought about it particularly since the advent of this commission, and there's always the nagging feeling that had I perhaps reported to the medical board or to the HCCC, perhaps, you know, I could have prevented ongoing problems. Mm-hmm. I must say, from what I've heard in the commission so far, I take some comfort from the fact that I didn't do it, that it sounds like it wouldn't have made too much difference anyway.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me this, Doctor. If you, as a doctor, become aware of any form of malpractice by another doctor, or, for example, observed gross negligence by another doctor, do you have any obligation to report?
I believe there is an obligation to report that, yes.
So, to drill down a bit, if you see gross negligence by another doctor, there's an obligation to report?
Yes, I certainly believe that's the status now.
And if there's malpractice by another doctor, there'd be an obligation to report?
I believe that's the case too.
Well then, now, if you have an allegation from an adult, but that a doctor has sexually abused a child, being that patient when they were a child, why would there not be a similar obligation to report?
Well, this question of whether there's the law about mandatory reporting, to my mind, doesn't make that clear. However,
not about mandatory reporting, it's talking about professional obligations. You see, as I understand it, there's an acceptance that the profession has a duty to look out for those in the profession who are doing the wrong thing.
Yes, I think there would be a moral. There is the question of, is there not a moral obligation to follow that up?
Well, if there's an obligation to report in relation to a practitioner who you know is grossly negligent or otherwise inappropriately discharging their professional obligations, why wouldn't that extend to knowledge that comes to you of an allegation that a doctor had abused a child in the course of carrying out their medical duties?
Yes, I would think that should fit into that category of needing to be reported.
Mm-hmm. Doctor, and I'm not expecting you to say yes to this, but do you have any awareness of the legal basis of any of the obligations that you have in relation to mandatory reporting?
How do you mean?
Well, for example, the national law which regulates medical profession in terms of those obligations, there is a requirement under the national law that a medical practitioner or other health practitioners report sexual misconduct of a colleague to APRA or the medical council, for example, and that's one source of an obligation. There's another source of an obligation that descends upon a doctor, and that comes from a different area of law. That's under the Children and Young Persons Care and Protection Act. And that's when, again, that's the obligation you rose to in making the phone call to docs, for example. So the disclosure and the reporting is made to a different organisation, and it's made on a different basis in that situation, you've seen a child at risk. And so there's a different sort of legal basis there. Now, where in the past have you received your education in relation to what your obligations are as a doctor regarding child sexual abuse?
Yes, well, I think most of the information comes from articles within journals, information provided by medical indemnity organisations, in the Australian Medical Journal, and some of the medical press, Australian Doctor, Medical Observer. There is from time to time articles about those matters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay. I have no further questions, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have any questions of Dr. Stone?
No, Your Honour, thank you.
And I have some questions. Doctor, I'm counsel for AWC.
Yes.
The St Ives practice was run by Dr. Pollitt and Dr. Dowsett and Dr. Rolleston before you began at the practice. Is that correct?
Yes.
And Dr. Pollitt provided a statement to police in 2009. And in that statement, he says that before Dr. Dowsett left the practice in 1973, he had informed Dr. Pollitt that Dr. Rolleston had been the subject of a complaint by parents who had alleged that Dr. Rolleston had inappropriately examined their son's genital area when being consulted for an injury, and that the matter was being investigated by some authority, possibly the Medical Board or the Health Care Complaints Commission. Do you have any knowledge of that complaint?
Yes, I do have a vague... Well, I don't have any memory of the complaint. I do recall that at some stage Dr. Pollitt did mention it to me, and I think it may have been about the time that Dr. Rolleston left the practice. My understanding was that there had been an examination which had been considered not appropriate, but in the context it had been looked into, I'm not too sure by whom, and as far as I was aware, had all been sorted out and resolved.
When you say that the complaint had been looked at by someone, do you mean that it had been looked at by the Medical Board or the Healthcare Complaints
I don't know.
Commission?
I don't know. I mean, it wasn't something that we discussed at any length. He mentioned it to me, and I had totally forgotten about that until really quite recently.
Could that is your awareness of the knowledge of the complaint have been prior to 1979?
Well, I suppose it could have been. It's a fairly vague memory. It wasn't something that was discussed at any great length, because as it was relayed to me, it was a complaint. It had been resolved, and there was no problem. Now, when that was mentioned, I don't know. I would have thought that it was something that cropped up around the time that he left. I certainly don't remember having any misgivings prior to that.
And Doctor, at the time that you practiced with Dr. Rolleston in St Ives, was it your practice to consult with children without a parent or a guardian?
No.
At the time that you practiced with Dr. Rolleston, did you see that Dr. Rolleston consulted with children without their parents or guardians?
Well, it may seem strange, but I wasn't aware whether he did or he didn't. The practice was busy from the moment we started seeing patients, we were in and out of offices, and there was many times when the day would go by and I wouldn't even see the other two doctors. So I was very unaware of what was happening in the other offices, or who they took in, or whether they saw children on their own or not.
Would you agree with me that it would be more appropriate to see children with a parent or a guardian than without?
Of course.
Thank you, Your Honour. No further questions.
Anybody else have any questions? Thank you, Doctor. You're formally excused.
Thank you.
Yes.
Your Honour, the next witness is Mr. Pem from the Healthcare Complaints.
You want to start him at 2 o'clock, do you?
I was thinking that might be a good idea.
There's a nod coming from behind.
Thank you.
We'll adjourn until 2 o'clock.